This collaborative project is called Urban Wildfire Interface, which is a play on land management terminology used to describe the intersection of development and wildlands fire. My collaborators are fellow artist Alex Wiseman and Michael Procta, a wetland ecologist. All three of us met back at BARC. In the Pacific Northwest, forests have a historic presence of fire on the land, and many plant and animal species are fire adapted. These photos are from an open series at Gifford-Pinchot National Forest just outside Carson, Washington. We were working in this location due to the relationships that we had with the Forest Service cabin community who have been coming to this area for decades. This is the site of the Big Hollow Burn, which saw fire at the same time as the notorious Labor Day fires back in 2020 in Oregon. Driven by wind, all three of these fires cumulatively burned 175,000 acres. We held space for this and for conversations to reintroduce the idea that fire is a natural part of the landscape, yet the current conditions have changed the historic behavior and presence, which had been carefully managed by its original people. This dialogue opens pathways between these truths for people whose lives and homes were also touched by fire. We went into the burn together to collect carbon samples, and that gets people out of their heads and interacting with the post-fire landscape, and beginning to understand it not only as a site of destruction, but also as one of rebirth. We headed back to the cabins to process the raw carbon and turn into ink and print on a portable letterpress. This experience of making together is an outlet for both grief and joy. And in being able to develop deeper relationships, we are also able to get at the deeper patterns at play, namely Indigenous erasure, and not only in the context of which we can environmentally benefit as a public, but also understanding our own responsibility in land theft and in a changing climate. This project asks big questions about land management. Is total fire repression any kind of answer in a changing climate, considering the resources and risks involved? Is taxpayer subsidy of commercial timber production over fire-wising communities the best that we can do when we are seeing larger scale fire on the land? This is a multifaceted and living project which has opened the doors for some of my own personal work to help support the larger conversation around environmental justice and our responsibility to the land that sustains us. These photos are largely from an event called Remembering and Reseeding as part of a community-driven memory activism platform known as the Vanport Mosaic Festival. This festival honors the many silent stories which have come to pass on the land situated on the banks of the Columbia River. Vanport as a community was known for its diverse culture of care. It was an integrated town formed in the late 19th century which had grown out of rail workers, stockyard encampments, displaced indigenous people, and immigrants. In May of 1948, the town was destroyed by a flood, even with enough advanced knowledge of the weather conditions. The residents were advised not to evacuate their homes out of fear of how predominantly white Portland residents would react to the incoming 19,000 Vanporters, even in a time of emergency disaster relief. Where the town once stood, the blackberry plant proliferates. We harvested this to pulp and make into small sheets of paper that I would use during my component of the festival, a print intervention. On the day of the event, I situated the press with type and ink right by the entrance, which was also the only exit at the Portland Expo Center. I had a question for everyone who entered the space. How are you arriving? Participants were invited to name this and to print their answer with me. Beyond my station, there was an extensive display of graphics, historical accounts, interviews, stories, artwork, medicinal tea, and songs offered to the public. After spending time in the space, people returned to the press to answer my second question. How are you leaving? How are you changed by the knowledge that is here and by what you've seen? Here you can see attendees holding their prints, which they took home. In the last image, you can also see there is a garland of cyanotypes in the background. I'm still working out how best to document this 40-foot long garland, but I want to name this as a related and also separate piece in this show. This piece was made in collaboration with my students at Many Nations Academy, in whose environmental science class we looked at the story of Vanport as a case study in environmental racism. Our project together was working in cyanotypes for the poetry of shining a light on their feelings and perspectives around that experience. Given the concurrence, our collaborative piece was asked to be part of the larger festival. The M&A school is located just a few miles away, right off the Columbia Slough, and this was a huge honor for my students to show their work publicly in a piece that braided together their cyanotypes along several other professional artists. The Blackberry Project is open and serial and is most active during the summer season when blackberry is flowering. In other iterations, we're having discussions of our language around how we describe non-native plants in connection to immigrants and immigration. So while this piece is extremely site-specific in terms of the plant communities, history of Vanport, and relation to the Columbia River, I'm working in concepts and materials that I see as reverberating out into other communities. The title of this show roughly translates to Drips of Southern Cravings, showcasing work by 10 different South American graphic artists, co-curated by Letra Chueca. I met these artists the year prior at Impresionante, an independent print festival in Santiago, and after a week forming friendships and connections, quickly realized the unique privilege of being able to transport work back to Portland. There's little artistic representation from South America in either the local Latine or print communities. I knew I wanted to create a show that was in no way a disservice to the artists and their cultural context by just plopping it in Portland without them present. So we requested recipes from each of the artists without stipulations and received everything from go-to sick day food to beloved grandmother's recipes. Before the opening night, we cooked each recipe for the attendees to enjoy while interacting with each different piece. There was something deliciously unorthodox about having hot food as part of a gallery exhibition in a paper and book arts show, no less. Marco Toxico requested pollo broster, which is Bolivian KFC, and so we borrowed a fryer to make fried chicken to order. On the same night, there was another show down the hall, and the smell from the fryer was potent enough to draw people from their opening and into ours. I share that anecdote because it feels like a metaphor for the show's goal, which was to create a space that supersedes language to be able to connect people with South American book arts directly. The writing selection for the serial project was curated by poet and creative writing professor Samia Bashir in conjunction with the Visiting Writers Series at Reed College. Samia would send me the selected text from a prose writer or poet after they'd confirmed their attendance and participation in the poetry salon. We held a particular emphasis on writers of color as well as two-spirit LGBTQ+ writers. I then used movable lead and wood type, magnesium cuts, linoleum carvings, polymer and magnetic plates, and even marble to design and produce closed broadside editions in quantities of 150. Our goal was to enliven the local gift economy. 1/3 was given to the author, another third was given to the reading's attendees, and the remainder was kept as an open archive for anyone to access. Each one of these broadsides would take anywhere between 1 and 3 weeks to produce. Often they would incorporate other techniques and materials as well, including silkscreen, risograph, indigo dye, fabric paint, mylar, and thread. My goal in designing each of these broadsides was to create something that wasn't simply a container for the writing, but that was truly created in ekphrastic response, and that would also serve as a portal for anyone to be able to step into the deeper meanings behind the written work. After several years of doing this work together, Samia and I were invited by the Poetry Foundation in Chicago, Illinois, to exhibit what was then about 30 of these broadsides. The name we gave this exhibition, The Lushness of Print, was a nod to Mary Shibist's poem, The Lushness of It, which we felt was a fitting description for the layered and rich collaborative world we had built together.